Everybody, good morning. Welcome to this 4th of November meeting of Te Puna Kōrero, should I say. Let's move straight to the agenda. And item 1 is apologies. We have an apology from Izzy Ford, which I'll move. Do I have a seconder? Yes, Councillor Sayuli. All those in favour? Those against, carried. We have no other apologies. Taku, you're here. You can hear us okay? Very good. Item number 2 is public forum, and we have no requests to speak this morning. So item 3 is conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest that people wish to declare? I'm assuming no. I'll take that as a given. Item 4 is notification of extraordinary business, and of which there are no items. And so that moves us to item number 5, which is confirmation of the minutes of the Te Puna Kōrero meeting of the 21st of October 2021. I'm going to move those minutes to get them on the table. Do I have a seconder, please? Mayor Baker, thank you very much. Is there any discussion about those minutes as a true and correct record? Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, look, during the consultation process on the proposed new wards, the letter U was added to the word Camborne. And I didn't say anything because I didn't want people to think I was a pedant. But
too late.
Unfortunately, because I didn't raise the point, the incorrect spelling stayed in the consultation documents and was subsequently used by submitters in the erroneous spelling. And the journalists at Kapimana News picked it up in the story as well, and so much for fact-checking, they just followed suit as well. And so now on the minutes as well, we've got page 6 and 7, they've got Camborne with a U. So please, just as there's no I in team, there's no U in Camborne.
Point well made, Councillor. Can we make sure that those minutes are corrected? Thank you very much. Is there anything else, Councillor Duncan, that you wish to raise? Anyone else on the accuracy of those minutes? In that case, I will move them. I'll put the minutes. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. So that moves us to our first report, item 6.1, which is Karihana Bay flooding. I'm going to move that report to get it onto the table. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Trillam, thank you very much. You'll note that we have an amendment from Mayor Baker, which we'll take in a little while. I just want to make a couple of comments, which no doubt you'll make as well, Ben, as you go through. But I just want to make it clear that what we have on the table at the moment is one is obvious, which is committing us to a citywide retreat policy or development thereof. And then number 2 is agree that we progress with the detailed design of option 1, which is the option that protects the most houses and is the most expensive, all right? So we proceed with the detailed design, and however, we only proceed with the construction of the first stage of that option, which is pump station, debris nets and inlet protection works, which is the $9.5 million, which is basically option 3. Just want to make that clear. And that, so we would not consider under 4 the construction of the rest of the items in option 1, or the rest of the stages in option 1, until we've had the development of a citywide retreat policy. And that would confirm the timing of these works against the other flood management projects in Porirua. So we would basically then have a look at how they would rank after the citywide retreat policy and after the first 3 stages go in. So no doubt you'll reiterate that, Ben, but I think it's a very important point to make, because that's what we have in front of us as a recommendation at the moment. So without further ado, Ben, can I just turn it over to you just to lead us through the issues here again? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning.
Because this is a bit of a watershed decision, if you pardon the pun. Yep.
See what you did there. Wellington Water has led the engineering investigation into infrastructure options in Karehana. And they've developed the three options that are in the paper today for you to consider. There are elements, as the Chair has identified, that are common between all three of those options. There's a large pump station in the lowest point of the park to try to reduce the frequency of flooding to those most vulnerable properties around the park. There's also improvements to the inlets into our pipe networks to try to reduce the risk of blockage, and also to more efficiently get the water into our network and down to that pump station. And then there is also the need for debris nets up in the steep gullies where there is a lot of gravel that the engineers identified were at risk of coming down in a large event which could damage homes and threaten the people at the mouths of those gullies. The differences between the three options is really the extent of the stream upgrades and the pipe upgrades to spread the benefits across the catchment. The engineering options also, the engineering investigation also identified what the residual risk, the leftover risk, would be if you selected any of these options. None of the options will eliminate flooding in Karehana. There will be another flood at some point. These options are targeting reducing the frequent flooding to the most vulnerable homes in that catchment. The options do consider the impacts of climate change and have sought to incorporate sea level rise and the increased rainfall and to prepare us as much as we can for that future. There are also 5 properties that are not benefited by any of the three options. The no cost-effective infrastructure solution was identified that can benefit everyone across the catchment. And that's why when we workshopped this with you 2 months ago, you identified that you would like investigative retreat as another tool for us to use to address the flooding to the most vulnerable properties across your city, such as these 5 in Karehana. Also at that workshop, there was discussion around where Karehana flooding fits in the context of flooding across the city. And the paper identifies that, yes, Karehana is your top priority in terms of the most vulnerable catchment in the city, but there are other areas that flood frequently, which we've all been made aware of with the recent flooding over the last 5 or 6 years. There's $20 million in the LTP to address the citywide flooding, and you'll need to decide how this is allocated. I have here Lindy and Mohammed from Wellington Water. So between the three of us, we hope to be able to answer any questions that you have and help you make a decision.
Thank you, Ben. You'll all be aware that Mayor Baker has an amendment to move to this, but I think we can take questions because they'll all be on the same topic, basically. I think we'll take questions now or anything else that you want to raise. Yeah. Yes, that will be asked. Councillor Duncan, I saw you had your hand raised, and then Councillor Trillin.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Look, my first one is, what do insurers tell us about your plans for this? Like, are the properties still going to be insurable, or
Very difficult to get a definitive answer out of them. I will be meeting with the underwriters in the organised by the Insurance Council of New Zealand to discuss what our plans are in Karehana, but it's very unlikely that they will give us a definitive answer of will they stay. But certainly the work we have done is targeted at trying to lift people to an insurable level without knowing exactly what that level is.
Yep.
Have you got a follow-up?
The debris nets that you talk about in there, you talk about the construction costs being factored into the price, But what about the ongoing costs? Because surely for maintenance, they'll have to be cleared regularly as well, won't they?
Yes, operational costs are important for us to consider, both for the stormwater and for the debris nets. We are getting prices for all those operational costs. They will need regular inspection and maintenance, but the removal of material behind them is going to be weather dependent, so it's not easy to completely quantify. But those costs are being developed now, yes. As well.
One more?
Yep, go on.
You tell us you've identified that Karihana is the most at-risk place that, in the city. Well, but then on page 25, item 55, under Titahi Bay heading, we're told there's been no catchment study done in Titahi Bay, and indeed there hasn't even been any money set aside to do a catchment study in Titahi Bay. So how can you therefore say Karihana is the most urgent?
So the way that the prioritisation was developed was to utilise the modelling that has been done across the city. There are only a couple of places like Whitby which haven't been modelled yet, but the 2/3 of your city have been modelled, including Titahi Bay. Using that model, they identified what floor levels would be, Wellington Water identified what floor levels were at risk and clustered them in areas. Yes, there are flood-prone areas in Titahi Bay, particularly White House Lane, which flooded badly in 2015. But in terms of frequent flooding and clusters of buildings within catchments, Karihana has the highest concentration of frequent flooding residential buildings.
So it's the cluster that you're going for rather than individual properties. So individuals don't really factor into
absolutely right. There are other, potentially other, I don't know of any other home more vulnerable than a couple in Karihana which have flooded.
Thornley Street, can I point Thornley Street out to you perhaps?
Good point. And there are other properties that we know do flood regularly across the city. And that was part of that discussion around maybe retreat as a more effective tool for identifying those isolated homes that are at risk of regular flooding.
Right, Councillor Tron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if you could talk us through, if we were to go with this recommended option around going with option one, but then delaying some decision making in terms of funding allocation. Could you talk us through what that timeline is likely to look like in terms of how long we're anticipating it's going to take to develop this citywide policy, and therefore how long it'll be before we can actually allocate that funding?
Yeah, so the intention for the retreat policy is to have the work done and include it as part of your consideration over the annual plan, which you will be doing early next year, about March. So that we're intending to have that information available for you at that point. The recommendations in here were to target the most impactful elements in Karihana that would be done in first, which are on that critical pathway. So there probably isn't a delay between that option and doing the full option one in terms of that critical path until March. But that probably is a fair summary.
Yeah, cool. No, thank you. That answers my question. And just the other one was, and it very well may be that you don't know on this yet, but just for our knowledge, do we have any idea at all of the rough ballpark in terms of how much we're going to need to be talking about, I guess, once we've got this full citywide study done in terms of adaptation costs, or are we completely flying blind at the moment until the study's done?
So it's very likely that there will be two elements in your prioritisation of properties in your retreat policy, which is those properties that are where there's a threat to life element. I'm thinking particularly areas like Rangatui Crescent, where there was fast flowing deep water adjacent to people's properties. That's a danger, a risk. So that's likely to be an element to be considered. The other one is the frequent flooding, people who flood more regularly than, say, once every few years. And we know from the modelling that Wellington Water has done, there's approximately 30 to 40 properties across your city that would fall into that category. some of those may be addressed by infrastructure solutions, but there will be certainly some that will fall into that. So the retreat policy is really how aggressively you would want to address those properties. We could rank them all with a criteria you'd approve, and then how quick do you want to start addressing those properties.
And sorry, that 30 to 40, is that including or in addition to the Karihana properties?
That includes the Karihana properties.
Cool. That's everything for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Hayward.
Kia ora matua, hea mana. Question for officers. I'm trying to understand if there was a delay in the implementation of option 1 as recommended by officers, what would be the risk of increased cost of consumables and infrastructure materials, considering that there appears to be in other elements of Wellington Water's operations significant inflationary pressure on the infrastructure to complete these tasks, and whether or not if we delay on in building this infrastructure that the costs go up further still?
Yeah, excellent question. We know that in construction costs in the water sector are going up at least 10% every year at the moment. That's the last few years' experience. There is a question about whether there will be a delay if you accept this recommendation. The first step that is needed is the detailed design, and that's going to take at least a year. There'll be consents involved in that as well. So the detailed design will need to be done before any construction occurs, and the follow-up, if you wish to proceed with the full design, could be made within that space as well. So the construction costs, yes, potentially if that stage 2 was delayed by some years, yes, there potentially could be escalation.
Can you come to the microphone, please? Yep.
Thank you.
If I can just actually add to it, with the detailed design, the cost is actually refined. So we have a higher level of contingency and risk, budget currently. So as we actually design, we will refine that. What we call is a level 4 estimate, and then at tender stage, you get the real price. And yes, it is very difficult to actually tell what that price will be because it's really going to be dependent on the tender eventually. But we should be closer to our estimate, hopefully, at that time.
You have another question?
One sub.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there any fiscal impediment in proceeding ahead with option 1 without having to wait for the policy on managed retreat? Is there any impediment to getting this job done?
Not that I am aware of. Graham, do you want to add anything to that?
Perhaps you could, while you're talking about that, Graham, the question that begs the question, the design and the design process, along with consents, I'd like to understand whether that's OPEX or whether it can be capitalised. And I also note that that $1.4 million is not in, if it's to start immediately, is not in this year's budget. There is no money in the budget until financial year 22-23. Where's that money going to come from? Yeah.
Through the chair, at section 12 of your report, there's a table there in front of you that says in your LTP you've allocated $10 million of CapEx starting 1 July 2022. So in terms of the councillor's question about fiscal impediment, you've got 10 million set aside, and then you have another 10 million the year after. So you're being told that it would take a year to do detailed design, and what's the big deal about starting that early now? There is actually no big deal because Wellington Water this year has $40 million of CapEx, and later in the agenda you're looking at the spend to date, the first 3 months of the year. They're on track with their CapEx, but in your report later this morning you'll see a table there that they're predicting spending about 25 million of the 40 million. So I would think if there's an appetite to get going, it will be more about the capacity to find the professionals to do the work out in the market at the moment, because it's pretty tight. But I'd like to think that we could start earlier.
Well, I mean, we would have assumed that we would start immediately anyway with design. The question was, where's the money coming from? And you've told us. Is that OPEX or CAPEX? It's CAPEX, so it can be capitalised.
It's capitalised. You would do the design, you would capitalise the design.
Just checking.
If I can just add to that, we have a design team that is familiar with the catchment, that has done all the investigation. They are ready to go into the detailed design on this project.
Councillor Sauli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question, please. You mentioned about the design of the wider city take about a year. In terms of, if we kind of agree with the amendment, at the moment I don't agree with the amendment. I'll be voting against it for now. But I just want to ask the question first. If we go ahead with the amendment, when would you start construction?
So the design process and consenting is likely to take a year. The funding is available next financial year. We would want to start in construction season next financial year if we can get those consents and the design complete.
Councillor, I think just to make it clear, it doesn't matter what option we choose, as it stands here, the recommendations, or the amendment. I think construction would start at the same time.
Okay. So my follow-up question then, in terms of when you talked about a year before, you were talking about the wider city policy taking a year?
The retreat policy, we're hoping to come back to you in March with options for you to consider.
Right.
So we would be able to consider a citywide retreat policy prior to any construction work at Karihana taking place, because it would still be in the design and consenting stage.
Okay. Yes. With that in mind, I'll be voting against the amendment and sticking to the option, simply because I'm more, I mentioned to Councillor Duncan this morning about Rangituhi, about Mungavin by Winley School, by Mungavin by the Mungavin shops, Dimmock Street, Warspite, Champion. So all those spaces, if I want to see what we're doing of that as well. I want to see things happening in Karihana Bay, Karihana to work to make something more manageable for them. But I also want to see that our city is covered as a whole too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seuli. Taku, you have a question or comment?
Just a couple of questions. One is the consideration around the treaty principles. You're saying that the design process will give effect to the treaty principles, the treaties of Waitangi. What are they? What do you define as that process?
Lindy, do you want to talk about the consultation that has occurred during the investigation?
Yeah. Morning. So in terms of consultation, we have shared the options with Ngāti Tawa, Naomi specifically, and obviously as we start the design process, if we are allowed to move forward, we'll continue with that consultation much more closely, and include those in our design, in our specific design options. We obviously have to go through still a concept design phase, and then into detailed design, and we'll take all those into consideration during that design process.
Does that answer your question?
So what you're saying is you're co-designing that particular area in regards to the treaty alongside Ngāti Toa?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, we will be.
Okay. Second question is Kariana Bay, or Kariana itself. Just to get my mind in terms of the focus out there, is that an early road in that sort of gully, sort of where those houses, those residents are built? Does it consider Honga Weka itself? that's a treaty process that's been around for a long time.
So this is a separate catchment to Hongareka. So if I can just clarify, we work in consultation, not in a co-design process. So it will be a consultation process for Kariana.
I can answer the Hongareka question. Wellington Water is also doing an investigation in both sides of Karehana, so James Street around the Plimerton roundabout, but also in Hongaweka, and studies have been undertaken, modelling has been undertaken into options to improve the flood, or to address the flood risk out there as well. The next step, and I'm working with Naomi Solomon on that at the moment, is to get out there and talk to the community about what the range of options are for them to consider.
Ben, it's correct in the papers that we have $3 million to address problems at Hongaweka.
That's Takapu Wahia.
Takapu Wahia, sorry.
There is $3 million
my
allocated
mistake.
to that area.
So there is no money for Hongaweka at this stage, aside from the $10 million, which was in 23-24.
So there is an investigation. So there is funding for investigation into Hongaweka flooding, but no option has been selected or progressed to design in Hongaweka yet.
Okay. Any other questions?
There's been a number of investigations at Hongaweka over many years. I think it's time to get some action in that space as well. I think just to end my question, I certainly agree with Whawhoi that the whole city area has to be considered. And sooner the better. Sooner the better. Thank you.
Councillors, are there any other questions? In the meantime, while you're thinking about it, there was a question raised by a local person in Plimerton, Plummer, around the WASTOPs, and whether, if I've got it correctly, I don't know whether you've seen that question, Ben, have you? He asked whether, there's the issue of the fact that, the tide was high and they didn't open properly, and that exacerbated the problems of flooding, whether those have been taken into consideration in the design of the three options, and the fact that they don't appear to work very well.
Might hand this operational issue over to Wellington Water.
Yeah, so with the Early Road culvert, there are two aspects, I guess. One is the WASTOP that actually stops the sand coming back into the pipe. The experience in the past on that has been that the pipe gets full to quite a long extent. And so if you remove the WASTOP, and we had this discussion with the flood reference group also, that if you remove the WASTOP, you're basically going to clog that pipe. And it's a huge maintenance cost also. So hence the WASTOP is in there. And if you have the high tide, then the pipe, the gradients, the flow gradients are not going to be there anyway during high tide. So yes, it does restrict the flow a little bit, but it's just comparing, I guess, whether you want to have it open and clogged with sand versus, or do you protect the outlet and it is going to be easier for water to flow, especially when the tide is low and you get the pressure buildup from the flood level. So on balance, what we decided there was that it's better to actually have the WASTOP in at this point in time. The other aspect is the inlet. And the inlet used to get clogged because there was a grate, and the grate was like a mesh. So what we have done is actually modified that and put a new grate, which has got angled straight bars, and that makes it more easier, and it is liftable. So there is a winch actually put in. And we worked with the both operations people from Wellington Water and from Porirua City to get the winch and everything is in there. It's just a couple minor tweaks to do to it. So that's the plan at the moment. But in the longer term, the solution will be a pumped solution. So you will overcome. So as soon as the primary system is actually not working well and the water levels build up, the pump will actually pump the water out. So that'll, of course, be under pressure pump. So that'll reduce the flood risk that way.
So, sorry, just a follow-up to that. So that means that the pump will be, on occasion, and the occasions where it floods, will be the sole outlet. Because you're assuming that the stream itself, with the outlet culvert, and maybe there's a high tide, won't be operating. Is that correct?
Exactly. So if you assume we go and actually make that culvert as good as possible under gravity, but you got a storm event, you got a high tide, basically nothing's getting out because water level differences, dictate. Water level comes to a certain level in the park, the pump will have to kick in and
Okay. Yeah.
pump it that way.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Duncan, you had a...
The technical term there, it does stop a little bit of water. So how much is a little bit?
You mean in terms of the WASTOP? The culvert capacity is estimated to be around what we call is 1 to 1.5 cumex. So that's 1,500 liters per second. And how much does it actually reduce? It's probably, 30% at least. Inefficient, maybe.
Difficult to
Yeah,
tell,
it's
and
difficult
also
to
without the WASTOP, what would be the restriction of the sand in the pipe? So.
The plumber who wrote this letter suggested that this is blocked completely and actually causing exact opposite of what you'd be wanting the pipe to be doing.
Yeah, and it's the risk of actually, as I said, the risk is really if you leave it open, you'll get that pipe 3/4 full, and then your capacity will be even lower. So yes, during the start of the flood event, it takes a little while before the WASTOP opens, but once it does open with slight elevated water levels in the park, then it tends to flow good. So it's a difficult one.
Yeah, and under any scenario that we're considering here today, Mike, in terms of what's on the table before us, there will be a pump installed with a capacity of 3 to 5 cumex. Is that correct? So, you have that in operation in order to get rid of water as well.
But if you've got a high tide that's stopping the water getting out, a pump's not going to make any difference to that either, is it?
Yes, it will. It'll pump whatever its capacity is.
So the pump station will have a separate outfall
Separate outlet.
From where the existing culvert, and an elevated one, and it will also, we've considered the impacts of 1 metre of sea level rise. The pump will still be able to function under a future sea level scenario as well.
Right. So, you're right? Mayor Baker has a question.
It was just a question on the WASTOP. So there's more than one there. So obviously it's the one to the right that sits to the right of Plymouton Boating Club that's on the beach that is full of stones the whole time and blocked. And we get photos of it regularly. And we still don't do anything about it. We don't put a grate or anything around it to stop it filling with rocks. That's not included in this, is it?
And improve maintenance to their WASTOP?
That particular WASTOP.
What enters? Where does the water in that come from?
It comes
Same
straight
stream.
from across the road and fills the houses down across the driveway. So it comes from everywhere. But that WASTOP in particular is permanently blocked with rocks. It's not a simple one.
You took the one at the outlet to Karehana, or?
Just over from the other side of the boat club. So it still takes that amount of water. Have you even looked at that one?
I don't believe if you're facing the ocean.
And it's the right side of the Plymouton Boat Club, not the left.
Yeah, that's
So you haven't looked at that one.
a different catchment.
Might be a look at.
Catchment, isn't
Thank
it?
you.
Yeah.
Not really, it's not.
Not really.
Well, if you stand there, it's not.
What? All right. Okay. Okay, look, is there anything else that anyone wants to ask? I mean, there'll still be an opportunity in a minute. In that case, I'm going to ask Mayor Baker.
I put my amendment. You've all got it in front of you. I don't have to read it, do I?
Sorry?
For the public. Yeah, I need to read it for
yes,
the public.
you
Okay.
need to
so
read it. I think you
obviously, it sticks to number 2. Agree to recommend the council commits to the development of a citywide retreat policy targeting the most vulnerable flood-prone homes in Porirua, prioritising homes where there is a threat to health or safety or frequent internal flooding. And then number 3 is agree to recommend that the council progresses with the detailed design and construction of option 1. Everything else has been crossed out, and I'm deleting option 4.
Do I have a seconder?
I had one.
There was a seconder. We'll stay with the original seconder, which is Councillor Waddle. So this amendment is now on the table. Yes, you can speak to it. I'll ask Mayor Baker to speak to it first, and then Josh, Councillor Trillin is.
Yeah,
wants to
thank
make a
you.
comment as well. Go for it.
The reason, I've heard all the reasons around the table, and I've visited obviously a lot of flooding areas. Hongaweka has been ongoing for years, and I do know we've had a couple of options in there, and we are looking at, obviously. I've been to the Thornley Street House regularly, so I understand why we need to have the retreat policy coming up. But for me, it's about doing one job and actually doing it right, because I think sometimes we just put our money there and we don't ever complete sometimes, because then we get diverted from something else. And that's the problem. There's always another project and there's always going to be another flooded house. And so I've got an issue with that, and that boils down to the 3 water issues. So I'm signalling going ahead to the new water identity. When it happens, I'm assuming it will happen, that we have got major issues, and this is one of them, obviously, but the others will be listed in high priority. James Street still floods, I realise that, and that those drains are being cleared and that they're being worked on at the moment. But I still want to do one job, and I want to do one job properly. And it's not about whether it's 3 or 10 houses, but we've spent an awful lot of work on this and a lot of time. And yes, it will probably get flooded again before the work started. And that's my issue, is that we spend so much time talking and design, and I feel like another year's gone by and we've got nothing. So my frustration levels grow. So I am here for the whole city, but I'd actually like to get one job done and one job properly. So that's the reason I've changed this option. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. Councillor Trillin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I strongly support the Mayor's amendment as well. To my mind, the reality is that this is the work that Wellington Water says we need to get done. And like Taku said, actually, that the sooner the better in terms of actually doing some sort of action here. The reality is that delaying a difficult decision doesn't make it any less difficult. And kicking this down to next year, I don't think is going to solve the problem. We absolutely do have to address the flooding issues that we have right across the city, but that shouldn't be done at the cost of only doing a half job here. We have to do it, like the Mayor said, do the job and do it right. This does mean we're going to have a tough conversation at next year's annual plan when we have this policy we're going to be looking at for right across the city around what we're going to do in terms of the costs we're going to face. But that's exactly why it's so important that we act quickly and we act meaningfully now. Doing half the work now or avoiding the difficult decisions is just going to make it even more expensive in the long run. So I will also support further climate adaptation work right across the city when we know exactly what that work will involve. And the thing that we all have to remember, and that I encourage everyone to think about at the moment, is that whether or not we spend the money on this climate adaptation, our community is going to face major costs. And the question that we have to decide as a council isn't, is there going to be a cost? It's, do we spend the money on prevention or do we spend the money on clean-up? And I support spending the money on prevention. End of the day, this is the work Wellington Water recommends. This is the work that the community has asked for. It's the work that needs to get done to address the problem at hand. And that's why I'm supporting the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Trillin. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, I speak against the amendment. I feel for the plight of the residents of Karihana Bay. It's devastating for them. But what concerns me that is if we proceed with completing the whole job, that will gobble up 90% of the $20 million that we've allocated for flooding across the whole city. This would give little solace to those individual property owners around Titahi Bay who suffer in exactly the same way as the Karihana Bay people, but have neither the eloquence nor the clout of the group in Karihana Bay. And I think that is a bad step from us. So no, I speak against it. I support committing to the development of the citywide retreat policy. I support progressing the detailed design and the construction of the first stage, but that's where it ends for me.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Waddle.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Mayor Baker and Councillor Trillin have said. I think, we need to do a job once and we need to do it right, not half-ass our way through it. And I think the fact that the consistent nature of the flooding and the damage that is going to happen again in Kariana Bay needs to be remedied as best we can, and we need to start it sooner rather than later. So I think it's pretty clear-cut for me.
Thank you, Councillor. Does any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Morrell.
Yes, I obviously fully support this. I feel for the rest of the community and the rest of the city, and we've been talking about flooding for years and years and years, and this is about getting some action finally, and there's always going to be someone who is going to, this is a priority area, this has been classified as the priority area so that we should get on it, and there's always going to be communities that will feel that they've been left out. But if I think of all the money we've spent in other parts already, particularly we're around Ngāti Tua School here, where there's extensive wetlands going in. It's all about the flooding area, so we're addressing that. So this is another community, and I think the devastation of that community in the last flood, if you walk those streets and saw those houses, we can't sit on our backsides and do nothing and say, oh, well, Kariana Bay can't have it because there's a greater priority somewhere else, so we can't spend the money and then blah, blah. We just got to get on with it. We'll be talking about it because we'll never agree in total what's got to be done. This is the priority. It should be done. We should be doing it. And like the Mayor, you get frustrated. I always say in business, you make a decision, you get on with it. In council, you make a decision and 3 or 4 years later, you get on to it. You get on with it. And this is just another one of those things. So we need to act now and we need to get this done and as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Morrell. Does anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Yes, Councillor Hayward.
Kia matua hea mana. I have enjoyed listening to the views of fellow councillors around the table. And I reflected a great deal on, during the long-term plan, I talked about a woman named Jo who lives on Main Road, whose concerns will be very similar to those that have been echoed by other councillors around the table about other parts of the city. I think it's important to show some nuance about this. Whether it's the amendment or the options, the commitments are still being made in terms of improvements, and there may not necessarily be a discernible difference in terms of time frame between the amendment and what's been put on the motion if everybody sticks to the song sheet in terms of what has been suggested in terms of the process. I guess, and no one wants to have the North, the West and the East fighting with each other over the scraps at the table. What I mean is the resources to actually fully do this work that should have been done a long time ago. And yes, it's taken a long time of process to get these things done, and the investment needed to have been done in the past as well. But those things are in the past. We now need to think about what we're going to do in the future. I think it is about the phrase duty of care. Not just about the project itself, but about the expectations that our community has to us to do work to a high standard. And I am very frustrated that this work is going to cost most of the budget that we had put aside for the long-term plan. But I do also recall the offhand conversations with councillors during that time period saying that amount was never going to be enough to cover the entirety of the city. So for those who are going to not support the Mayor's amendment, I'm calling you out. When the annual plan comes up, I want to see you guys put up a motion to increase the funding for stormwater improvements, catchment studies, and make sure that not just the North, but the East and the West. And if you're silent on that issue, when we come around to that time on annual plan, the world is watching and the voters are too. So I'm going to support the Mayor's motion, but I expect everyone around this council table, and I'm calling you out. Let's get the money. Let's put a lot more into this. And we can do it in the annual plan at exactly the same time with the managed retreat policy. Otherwise, what are you here for? Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Wehapi.
I love being a broken record, but I do actually support what Councillor Morrell was saying, the fact that we talk about this and we can do studies and have meetings about meetings for years and not get anything done. So, and I actually did see the devastation of this flooding in Plimmerton last year, and I did walk the streets, and I did see, you know, it was pretty dire. And I do agree there are lots of other issues around the whole of the city, but let's just get this thing done and then move on and do the next, and then do the next, and do the next, and just not talk about it, just do it.
Thank you, Councillor Suli. Who's got to go?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Work's been done already, correct? It's going to be done anyway. Is that correct, Ben?
No, it hasn't.
The only work that has been done.
No. What I mean, it will be done regardless of which motion we take, right?
Yes. Well, the elements, the first three elements, what started, what we had on the paper is the first three elements that you saw: pump station, debris nets, and inlet protection. That would be done regardless, because I'm sure we'll agree to something. Study going ahead. What we are discussing here is whether all the rest of the elements in that option one, we're just going to approve them now, and they will be scheduled.
Right. Okay. In that case, I'm sticking with my. I'll be voting against the amendment, simply because of the idea that, and I understand there's work that's being done at the moment, and you know, give me a break, Councillor Hayward. You know, we're here for the entire city as well. As you say, and actually at the moment, you know, the reason why this is now on the table, because we've had some vocal people come to the table, and I totally understand their plight, but there's been silent people in the past 10 years who have not had a voice to talk about their plight, and so, you know, we are now talking about it because of some proactive people who do that, but we have people in the city who are not as active, who are not as proactive because of shyness or whatever, whakama, whatever, and we have not kind of considered them back then. And so for me, I want to see that work done in Karihana Bay. Don't get me wrong. But I also want to see that the other citywide, that's covered as well. So I'll be voting against it. Thank you.
Okay, look, I think we've had enough debate and discussion around this. The reality is, whatever we do, the options that are before us are for a 1 in 30 year flood event. There are no cost-effective options to completely eliminate flooding, and I think we need to remember that. All right, this is money which will not fix the problem, because you could do all that and you'll have an event which is a 1 in 50 year event which will impact. So, I mean, that's just the reality of things as they are. But thank you very much for everyone who's made a contribution. I think we've had a healthy discussion around the table. I'm now going to, and I'll ask for a show of hands, please. I'm now going to put Mayor Baker's amendment, which is up on the screen that you can see. All those in favour, put your hands up, please. That's, you got those? Those against? So that's 1, 2, 3. Taku, are you going to vote? We can't hear you.
Do I get a vote on this?
Of course you do. Yeah, you have a vote around the table.
Oh, well, I've never in the past been able to vote on any amendments in any.
Hasn't he? Well, but he can.
This triennium.
He can.
This time I can.
Yep. My gosh.
Use your power, Rangatira.
We've all learnt something today. I think we need to clarify that with you going forward. But yes, you can vote. So what's your vote? If you want to make one, you don't have to. You can abstain.
I'll abstain for now.
Okay, that's fine. In that case, it's... Sorry?
No, I'm surprised, that's all. So.
Okay. So we'll address that later.
Yeah.
You're surprised 7-3, is it? Okay. So, sorry, can those against, I think there was 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Yep. Okay, I declare the motion carried. So now do we have to vote on the substantive, which I'll put. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you very much, councillors, for that process. That now moves us to, you're leaving a note to that. So what we voted on the second time is to make sure that you know, we're getting everything covered. All right. Let's move to item 2, which is the Mana Squash Club lease area extension. I'm going to move the report and ask. I'll ask for a seconder, Mayor Baker, to get it on the table. What? Oh yeah. Well, Matt, we'll let. You can speak. Absolutely. Don't worry. Of course. So you can. I'll take it. The report is read. Matt, are there any? You don't need to go through the whole thing in detail, but are there points that you want to make regarding this?
Yeah, I think I would like to, Mr. Chair. I won't talk through the proposal in detail. You will have all read the report. The staff recommendation is to decline the proposal. This is for kind of a couple of principal reasons that I'd like to emphasise now. The first is that Ngāti Toa Domain's coastal character is unique in the city, and in many ways is the jewel of our reserves estate. The proposal will further enclose public open space in an area of the domain that is already quite congested. Further enclosure of the space is contrary to the management plan for the domain, and we've tried to present mock-ups for councillors to view, which are appended as Appendix 4 to your report. The second point I'd like to make is that despite this, where new buildings are deemed appropriate, the domain's management plan requires them to facilitate multiple use and outdoor recreation. The proposed extensions is quite a specialised structure, and it won't give effect to this outcome. Those are the sort of key points I'd like to direct councillors.
Thank you, Matt. We have some questions and comments from you. First, Councillor Morell, then Mayor Baker, then.
Well, I find the option given to us absurd. I can't believe that we've even considered this not to go ahead. This is a very small piece of land. It's a institution that has been there for a number of years. It's very successful. It's about also further attracting people to the community, to the city. We've got the cricket pavilion just along the road, and the rugby club, which has been extended. And here we are saying on a little piece of land that we refuse. That we are. I'm just astounded that we should even consider that this should not go ahead. To be honest, when I read this last night, I lost a bit of sleep on it because I thought, my God, where are we going? I mean, we're trying to make the city attractive. We're trying to attract people and to keep a bit of grass. And I used to live right close to it and look at it. It's just a little bit of grass, and it makes no difference. There's a kindergarten behind it. There's some water towers there. There's a tennis club there. It's just adding to that community. So you can see my frustration, and I just will be voting certainly to proceed to make this happen.
Thank
quickly.
You, Councillor Morell. Mayor Baker.
I totally agree with you, Councillor Morell. I was really annoyed to see this come through. It's not often we get growing sports clubs, and this one is growing, and it's growing really well. It's not asking us for any money. Your picture on page 58, showing what looks like obviously a shed, could have a fantastic mural painted on it, so it could be part as we rode past and walked past. It's not blocking anything for anybody. It's a footpath that we all zoom down really quickly, either on our bikes or people are walking quickly. I was really frustrated by this because growth for clubs doesn't happen that often. and it is a growing club, and I think the site will actually look tidier, especially if we do make them put a mural on it. So I'm like Ewan, I do not agree with this, and I'm supporting that they be allowed to do it.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan and then Councillor Trillin.
Yeah, I agree with the Mayor and with Councillor Morell. I was astounded when I read this. I thought, this is written by somebody who hates squash, surely, because it just didn't make sense to me. And I have to ask, did you receive the letter we received from Mana Squash yesterday as councillors? Because surely that scotches all the arguments you had against it. Did you receive the letter?
Through the chair, no, we've not received the letter.
I'll leave a copy for you then, because it's a very good read, and there's letters of support from people all around the country. Now, surely if we're talking about significant growth in Porirua, then the squash club should be allowed to grow along with that growth in the city. We're talking about a piece of land that's 14 metres by 20 metres. That's 280 square metres, and I went up yesterday and photographed it. That's it there, just that piece of lawn. What the hell? I mean, goodness me, it's completely useless there anyway.
It might block the view.
Yes.
Of the supermarket.
And attachment 2 suggests that there's concerns about it abutting. It only abuts at one peak point anyway, and I'm sure their plans could accommodate that abutment anyway.
Yes, they could.
Yep, yeah, they could, yep. So,
they're willing to
we got a proud history of squash in New Zealand, and Paul Cole, the guy who's just won the British Open there, I mean, he's sent a letter in support of it, talking about...
All right. Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Trillin, you haven't finished yet?
No, come on, mate. I had another couple of points I wanted to make. The point of the club regularly complaining about parking. I always complain about parking there as well when I go to watch rugby, soccer, netball, softball, all the other sports that occupy the hectares and hectares of land that there is there in the park. And to talk about stopping them using this little piece here, it just seemed stupid, absurd to me. And look, I go against that recommendation.
Councillor Trillin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I said a few questions. So the first, in relation to Act 21, it says that the proposed extension does not comply with cycleway standards due to the issue of the vertical wall. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit more and the impact that would likely have, like why that's so significant?
We use Ostroad cycleway standards in the development and design of our pathways, and they indicate that you should maintain at least a 1 metre buffer from any vertical barrier to a cycleway. It's just a point. It wasn't necessarily a significant point within the paper, but it's something that we would need to have compliance with.
Sorry, just say that again. It's something
that we would need to have compliance with.
A 1 metre buffer.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, the rest of the building doesn't have a 1 metre buffer. I mean, there must be. I mean, I think the squash club have indicated that they're willing to talk about that, but are we going to be bloody minded if we went ahead and agreed to it and insist on a 1 metre buffer when the rest of the building doesn't have it?
We can have that conversation with
all right. It's a detail, but anyway. Sorry, Councillor Trillin.
No, that's okay. What I wonder there is if that is an issue. I guess I've got a two-part question in relation to that. Is that likely to create any additional costs in terms of mitigating that problem? And if so, can that be factored into this proposal? If there are costs being created by the squash club, would the squash club be covering those costs? Or is there likely, if we want to stay compliant with that, are we going to face a bill as council?
I think through the chair, that's something we can explore with the squash club. Yep.
I think the squash club, they've been asked the question about, council's not going to put any money into this and they're going to pay for everything.
Yeah, cool. So I just want to make that really clear that if there is a cost there, that's not something that we'll be wanting to cover. My second question was in relation to 28. It says if the recommendation is not adopted, it's recommended that a crime prevention through environmental design assessment be undertaken. Could you talk us through what that would involve? And again, is that going to involve cost for us?
So we would engage a professional to carry out that assessment. We would anticipate that would be the squash club's role to provide that assessment for us.
Thank you.
Cool, thanks. The last one, sorry, just and the report does note that obviously Ngāti Toa as a site does have particularly strong significance for mana whenua, and I wonder if this might actually be something for Taku. Is this something that Ngāti Toa or that you, Taku, have a strong view on?
They have been asked, but Taku, do you want to make any comments?
I would like to hear from Taku, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if they've been approached, I think it's only fair that we do take into their consideration if they have commented on it. I haven't been au fait with any of the comments or any of the feedback at all.
Okay. Councillor Hayward, or you finished? Sorry, Councillor Trillin. Councillor Hayward.
Kia matua hea mana. Point of order. I want to check if this motion is voted down, the recommendations, what happens to the substantive part of this? So
I think what I'm just trying to gauge the feeling around the table, and it seems pretty evident to me that people are not in favour of the recommendation here. In other words, I want to substitute. I would like to withdraw it, the motion, and substitute or withdraw recommendation 2 and substitute it with a new recommendation 2 that council approve the mana squash court. All right?
Right. And that's with the consent of the two people who've moved and seconded.
Yeah, I moved it and Baker consent.
Okay, so I'll put that to the side. My question is to officers. The way I've read this document, it sounds like there's been very little involvement by council officers. So could you give me a commentary as to how you've engaged with the squash club and in relaying the concerns that have been raised as a reason to decline this application, and where there would have been an opportunity perhaps for council officers to negotiate or work with the squash club to figure out a design that would have been a proposal that could have come to council for approval? Was there a possibility of that? And can you commentate on how officers have actually handled this work with the squash club? Kia ora.
Through the chair, my understanding is that throughout this process, the planner was engaged with internal officers. I believe there were some brief conversations with the squash club, but as I understand it, nothing substantive.
Councillor Hayward.
So I'm left in a quandary, Mr. Chair. If the motion goes back to agree, then I'm also concerned about what the level of detail and what we are agreeing to is, because we haven't given guidance to officers on the features of that design being able to meet the expectations of what we want to see for the city, as well as what the squash club want to see for improved facilities. Now, I've been to that site. I was there on 21st of May, so I know what that location is like, and others have given their commentary about what the usefulness of the space is, and I'm also mindful that it is a shared space. But I also point out that I have written to the Mayor and to the CE about this being a broader issue around the use of recreational spaces in the city, and perhaps a more structured principles-based review of our recreational spaces for sporting groups in the city needs to be taken in the same way that we did it for the long-term plan around our community spaces. That way, we get true buy-in and engagement by whether it's a council or someone that we contract out to actually look at the long-term investment across the entire city, across all the codes. Because today it's the squash club, and tomorrow it'll be the league, and tomorrow, the day after that, it'll be tag, it'll be some other organisation. Can't we do this properly the first time, right time? Kia ora.
So you're suggesting that we delay?
I'm suggesting that I will have to abstain if it's going to be agreed, because I don't think the document pulls me in a direction that says we've got a well thought out document here. And I worry that was because there was not good enough engagement between the squash club and officers in the first place to deal with this issue. And so now approving it most likely will pass, but now we will have a problem having to reconcile how we deal with all those issues and work on finding a happy way way forward, which we should never have as councillors. We should never have had to get to that place in the first place.
Would it not be true to say that those issues will be dealt with when they go for consent? Those issues will be dealt with, and there are existing processes in council that will allow that. And I assume that the issue about, closeness to path and sun and all the rest of it, all those issues will be dealt with, all right? We're not saying that they can go ahead and build this, because we can't. We're saying that we agree to give them a lease. They will come to, as I understand it, is this correct, officers? They will then come to council with a proposal for a building and seek consent. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing, Councillor Hayward.
One last comment then,
Yep,
Mr.
sure.
Chair, and that is all very well and good, but that's not the substance or the intent or the approach that was taken in the document that was put on notice. And so therefore, again, I come back to this phrase, duty of care. We have not done a very good job here. We're going to fix this problem around the council table, and hopefully we'll be able to, reconcile this through the consenting process. But I also think of the wider systemic issue that I'm trying to highlight here, and there's a way to resolve this. So hopefully, come the annual plan, we may be able to have a kōrero about that. Kia ora.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure you will raise it again at annual plan time. Yeah. Does anyone else wish to speak? You've already spoken, Ewan.
Well, when you put the motion, I can speak again, can't I? When you put the new motion.
Well, can he? This is the discussion. Yeah, this is the discussion. I mean, you go on, have another.
Well, I'm just concerned that when I hear about meters and having to be meters away, that we don't put them that they don't have to be put through so many bloody hoops that they give up and say, oh, it's too hard, let's just forget it. We've got to work constructively with them in a positive manner to make this happen, and it's not like throwing the rules at them that makes, oh God, here we go again sort of stuff. And we're still talking about this in 2 years' time when we go through a resource or a process. Now, I know you have to go through a legal process, but let's not make it too difficult. Let's try and work with them to get a plan and move on and get the thing built.
Noted, but building consents are building consents.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. All right, anyway, we've done that. The feeling I get from the meeting, I would like to withdraw recommendation 2 as the proposer, and the Mayor Baker agrees with that withdrawal, and I'd like to substitute that with a new recommendation that which would read: agree to recommend that council approve Mana Squash Club's application to extend the area of their existing lease. Right, we're not extending the building. We're not approving the building. So, does everyone understand what is now on the table? All right. Okay.
Sorry. Just a question before we do that. Sorry. Can I ask a question before we do that?
Yeah, sure.
Just regarding how does that? I know it's only that small space, but does it impact the congestion and all that? Does it impact with the other clubs in that same area?
No,
because it's about 4 or 5 different.
No.
Okay.
So I'm putting that recommendation. Councillor Morrell would love to second it. No, I have to. Oh, you have to. Okay. All right. Seconded by Mayor Baker. I'm now going to put the new recommendation. Taku, you want to make a comment?
No, just pretty excited about a boat.
I'm pleased. So I'm putting this substituted recommendation. All those in favour? Aye. Taku, what was that? Aye. Oh, good. Those against? Carried. And now I'll put the substantive motion, or we don't need to do anything else? No, that's it? Fine. Phew. Well done, councillors. And that moves us to item 6.3, which is last but not least, and that's the finance report for the 30th of September. That's for the first 3 months of the year. I'll move the report to get it onto the table. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Duncan, thank you very much. He doesn't want to second this. Too late, we've got Councillor Duncan. Graham, are there any, I'll take it as read. There may be some questions that councillors want to ask about projects or whatever, but do you want to just give us the real key points that we need to take into account?
Thank you, Chair. Just regarding the recommendations, there's two additional budget recommendations for the transport. These are in addition to NZTA funding, which was discussed here on the 21st of October, so just making that note. The other point is that we received updated the claim for the TG Link roads, and that was being paid for by NZTA. There's some COVID risks which are coming through. There's about 400,000 to date. Most of that relates to the link roads. And in terms of our performance to date, we are ahead of budget by 1.9 million, and that carries forward in terms of basically the same amount by year end as well, in terms of the forecast. So the forecast is saying that we basically will continue on basically at the same amount, though there is additional risk, I think, coming through with some of the, if COVID actually does come in terms of our revenue and potentially some expenses. In terms of the additional money in terms of the performance to date, there was 500, almost 600,000 came through from rates. In terms of when we did the LTP for the first year, there was quite a bit of backlog in terms of properties being assessed by QV, which we weren't aware of, and then they came through into the year. So that's given us a bit of an increase in terms of monies, which we can use for how we assess around the annual plan, whether we allow that to continue or not. So there's a bit of positive news from that in terms of going forward into the annual plan. Most of the other is relating to expenditure, which has been underspent year to date, and some of that is timing, but we'll just have to work through because this is just the first 3 months. In terms of capital expenditure, which Andrew Dalziel mentioned before, is around the three waters. Year to date, they are on track with the expenditure of $5 million, which is in line with the budget, but they are forecasting to be underspent by almost $12 million. However, that $12 million underspend includes $9 million additional for the Parramatta wastewater pipe. So effectively, in terms of the budget items, they're about $21 million behind. And that's the work which we're now working with Wellington Water in terms of the what they're going to deliver this year and then how that will impact into the annual plan. And talking about the annual plan is that we're starting the discussions on that now internally, but basically when we give you the annual plan, I have to make sure that we're still going to balance the budget over the 3 years of the LTP in terms of the rate increase of the 765 over 3 years, which was fixed. So basically as part of the annual plan is we'll be looking also at that third year to make sure that we still come back to a balanced budget.
Thank you, Graham. So, yeah, I will open it up for questions. Councillor Trillin.
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, so just to double check to make completely clear in regards to the second recommendation here, so this is just about allowing funding, which is 100% coming from Waka Kotahi and isn't costing council any more money at all. Is that right?
That's correct.
Cool, thank you.
Yep. Councillor Hayward.
Kia ora matua, hea mana. I want to get a sense of under what criteria would councillors be able to ask to be added to the project exception reports, because my concern is that we don't have a provision in here based on a number of incidents that have happened more recently around the wastewater treatment plant and around the investments and making sure that those projects are being met on time and addressing risks that are related to that project. Now, obviously, we have this all raised in the joint committee meeting, but also I suspect that we may, as a full council, council may want to consider whether or not there are additional issues that are at play that we need to be abreast of when it comes to the financial reporting. Kia ora.
I
just
comment. Well, hold on. Yeah, I will. I just wonder whether the chief executive or
we do
covered.
give you project exception reports. I'm not quite sure what you're asking
You're saying
for.
So obviously this document has gone through audit and risk and has come to here.
No,
Not the full, not
it
the
hasn't gone to audit and risk.
The projects do. My concern.
They will go.
Yeah, my concern is that. Well, and again, I can raise this with the deputy chair, but I'm just wondering whether or not, as a council, we may want to identify this as a particular area of focus, even though we do have this at joint committee level as well.
Sorry, identify what? The
The
you're
risks,
talking
the
about
inherent risks around the wastewater
treatment.
treatment plant management and our investment in those sites, and making sure that the investments and the progression of spending on those investments is tracking adequately.
I don't disagree with you. I think it can be handled in the normal committee. But what makes those any more important than the rest of the money that we spend, or we're planning to spend in Three Waters, on wastewater, for example?
So in the project exception reports, there are already exceptions for the essential water wastewater tank guidelines. There's already ones in there. So it's not, for me, it's not a question of whether or not one project or another project. I'm saying that is actually an area of inherent risk if current events have proved to be the case. And I wonder whether or not we should be looking to add that in as an additional exception report category.
Councillor Morrell,
as chair of the committee, we have requested that project reports as contained in this report, this type, are included in the papers for the meeting. Then that once they have been approved, they become an agenda item for full council. So they will get into the system, but not just through this way. So hopefully next week or the week after, when we have our joint committee, you'll see some of these exception reports, the project reports attached to the documentation, and then we can go through it, and it goes through that way.
I'm willing to wait, but I think for the guidance.
Yeah, I do note what you're saying, and I think we do need, because we have been asking for these things for a long time. You're right, and so let's make sure that they do come through. Are there any other questions that people want to ask of? Yeah, okay. Councillor Morrell, then Councillor Duncan.
Just under the major projects, the Kōrero area program, I'm still a little concerned there about flooding, dare I say it, in that part of the world as a consequence. And so I just, I know that it is up for the developers to mitigate and to, neutral, but is that stormwater neutral? That's what the correct wording is. So I just wanted to keep that on the table.
Yeah, Kōrero flooding.
Yes.
Yeah. Do we have you got another?
Yeah, I do have another question. It's around the Central City Stormwater Improvements project. It talks about we're still trying to buy the land from the from the education department because also of possible Ngāti Toa ramifications. And also talking to the hockey club about protection as well. I would have thought that would have already been done because that project has started and is on hold and coming back to restart in October.
Yeah. Good questions, and we'll.
Through the chair, so two questions there. The first one about the land is the Ministry of Education had a obligation to offer it back to Ngāti Toa. And so those conversations are happening, and I think we're all reaching agreement on leasing the land, which we'll all be comfortable with. So for those works, so or having an easement, one or other over that. So I think that's almost resolved. And in terms of the hockey turf, if you remember, a lady came into the council chamber representing hockey and talked about While she understood the work we were doing was for the public benefit, it would be to the disadvantage of hockey in a 1 in 100 year flood. And we made a commitment to get Wellington Water to actually have a look at that and see if there was anything we could do about it. So we've had a look at it, but the work would be extremely expensive, and we haven't got it factored into the LTP.
Yep, and the Kinaparu question?
Nothing further from last time that Councillor Morrell raised it. So, yeah, we'll do the best we can with the budgets we have.
Yep. Sorry, now Councillor Duncan.
Yep, mine also relates to the Kēniparu area program. It's a project summary for Porirua Adventure Park. It says there's a renewal of guarantee being waited on.
Coming to us.
What is that?
For the Adventure Park?
Yeah.
So you'll recall that the bank guarantee that council gave several years ago expired earlier this year. Select have asked us if we will put it in front of the council again. We will do that. But we are decoupling it at the moment from the agreement to lease. So there's two reports will come to you around the Adventure Park. One is the extending the conditions around the agreement to lease. That will be with you relatively soon, before the end of November, I think. But the bank guarantee issue will take longer. We've been waiting for some work on that from the. We did an economic benefit assessment last time, and we're refreshing that. So we're just waiting on that work.
Does that answer your question?
Yep, no, one more.
Oh, one more, sorry. I did.
On page 105,
Yep.
the risk to the gravity sewer main, conditions being assessed. Are these old pipes, or are they digging up the ones that they've just actually fixed and doing it all over again? Because they seem to be digging that part of the main road there a hell of a lot lately.
Sorry, I have to ask that question, Mr. Chair. I can come back with some information on it.
What part of the...
It's where the crosses the road, main road, Titahi Bay, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah,
So they've sealed it, opened it, sealed it.
Yeah. Nick, did you want to make a comment with regard to...
Yes, through you, Chair. Just with regards to Kinaparu Landing, we will be coming to you on the 18th of November workshop with an update on the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund outcomes, because Kinaparu Landing has gone through as a fast-track component of the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, which means that Ngāti Toa new agreement with Caris, Kāinga Ora and PCC are looking at a review extension of what's happening at Kinaparu, which we will bring to you in detail, and starts to address the flooding in more detail, along with the housing intensification and some of the work that may need to be thought through a bit more with regards to intensification down there and to fulfil Ngāti Toa's aspirations. So we will be in a workshop with you on the 18th of November, just giving you a high-level update on what's changing there, and that to let you know that it's in that process. So there's more work going into it, with Origin acting on behalf of Ngāti Toa and with Ngāti Toa itself.
That will be useful, thank you. Councillor Trillin, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. So I just had another question just in relation to the Weneta to Oniposo Shed path, page 95 and 96 of Diligent, for people following. I just had two questions. One, under the risk section, 96 of Diligent, talks about how Ngāti Toa endorsement is critical, and that a follow-up discussion with Ngāti Toa was anticipated to take place in mid-October, which I assume was before this report. Is there any more up-to-date, anything on that?
Through the chair, I'll get a briefing this afternoon, but I've heard from Nigel and Justine that we're coming together quite nicely. So Ngāti Toa had a number of questions and concerns, and we've been working through those with them. But I think I'd like to think perhaps jumping the gun, that there'll be support in principle for our application, but I think we're just about there.
Cool, thanks. And just the other thing in relation to that was it says at the bottom under corrective actions that the overall status is amber. On the dashboard, it has the overall status as red. Just which one of those is correct and how at risk, I guess, we see this project as actually being.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not the expert on how we do red and amber. I think we've talked before about this project in terms of we're underwriting it, but we'd like money out of the NZTA and out of applications for lotteries and things like that. But as I've indicated to the first question, we were just slightly behind in our consultation, but I think we're actually looking pretty good now. So it's just a matter of putting in the application for consent and starting to request funding from other parties. So I think we'll try and give you the assurance that we're on track.
Cool. No, that sounds good. Thank you very much.
But the funding's not there. Yep. Okay. Are there any other questions? We have a grant. In that case, I'll put the motion that we approve the recommendations. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried. I'll now declare the meeting closed at 9:55 a.m. and we're going to have morning tea after this, just so you know. Thank you.